Well, we were discussing this end of the morning, this way of trying to learn something about this system. We talked about a thought. Now, the core of the system is really thought, though it involves everything. And the way it works, how with all sorts of emotional disturbances, such as anger, you could, first of all, use the words, find the words which will stir it up, so as you can then get something to observe, to see, learn about the relationship between the word, the thought, and all that follows, the feeling and the state of the body, and so on. And of course, in doing that, you're suspending the anger, I say, holding it in front of you, rather than, it's not that strong that you feel you absolutely must express it, nor are you keeping it hidden, right? You see, so therefore you're able to see this process and learn something about it. So you're beginning to get acquainted with the system, right? How it really works. If you don't have that element of thought in there, or language, then you don't see the system because the core of it is missing, right? You see something happening, and then you say, that's the typical attitude, and the next thought comes along and says, there's something happening, independent of thought. And you get caught in that same fault again, right? So, you see, the point is you've got to be seeing that it's actually happening, right? The thought is behind this system, right? Otherwise the system seems to stand by itself, independent of thought. Like if you take any company like General Motors, it's entirely organized by thinking that it exists and has a certain structure, right? And except for that thought, it wouldn't exist. Unless people believed it existed, it wouldn't exist, you see. And they'd have all the factories and everything else, but they wouldn't know what they're supposed to be doing or how they're supposed to be related or anything. So the thought is at the core of it, right? And that there's a whole system, which develops out of that. And we want to be able to see this system in operation, so we have to have it there in front of us to see it, and suspended. And then the second point about the use of language is, after you see something, then you should also put it in words what you have seen, right? Right, because you want to inform the thought process of what you have seen, right? And you see what I mean? Otherwise, you may see something and the thought process doesn't know about it, so it will just go on as before. So the thought process doesn't see, right? It can only get information from, a typical way of getting information is from words, right? You see, on such an abstract level anyway. So therefore, it's essential to say we use words to elicit this thing, to make it visible. And also we then may use words to state what we have seen, right? But it's not to do it the other way around, to say, this is the way it is, and then I see it, you see. That also can be done. And that leads to trouble, right? Illusion. So, which I'm going to discuss, as we go along. So, so that is a key point. Now, maybe we could have 5 minutes if we wish to discuss all this before going ahead to another point, if you wish.
I'm going to take this a little deeper, if I may. I'm aware now that my conditioning makes me feel the way I feel because of looking outside of me for what I feel and blaming the people that are yelling. And I'm looking at it. And then, lo and behold, right next to that feeling, I see that I'm a very serviceable person. Up to now, I believe that I service people with all my love because this is what I learned from my mother, and I really love it. Now, I'm even starting to question that.
Yeah.
Am I doing it because I'm afraid I'm going to displease people and they may end up yelling at me? Or am I doing it to be liked?
Yeah, so I think you have to sort of look at all that. Those details are things that really you have to look at for yourself, you see. I think that what I would suggest is that whoever is interested in this should, from time to time, especially when they're by themselves, inquire into just that sort of question. You see, you see that's what we call the homework, and that's part of it anyway. And so that whenever you have time and are so inclined, then you can ask questions like that and try to find the answer in the same way as before, by observation, right? You see, it's no use for somebody else to tell you, because, you know, that will be very superficial.
Not that I expect an answer, but I'm looking at this and I'm saying, if the chemistry of the body and the mind work together in thought, and up to now, before my realizing my conditioning, they've been working pretty smoothly as far as they were concerned. Now, I'm changing my attitude. All of a sudden, the brain and the body say, hey, what's going on here? That's not what we're used to. And I'm getting a reaction, I'm feeling a reaction of their confusion, if it is that, of the chemistry imbalance. And it could be depression or fear. And that would give me choices, either to escape, go back to the way I was, call a friend, raid the refrigerator, take a pill, or whatever, or stay with what it brings me, to give the system, if it's depression or fear, if I can stay with it without finding an escape. Is that the adjustment that the body needs chemically, and this is the symptoms I'm receiving, because they look negative to me, to sort of straighten their problem out, and then there's something else that takes place, some kind of lightness, some kind of freedom, some kind of something else that if I didn't let it stay, I would block what was there. If my conditioning was to eliminate the terrific fear of confusion that I'm feeling.
Yes, well, I think all of that is the sort of thing you have to do, you see, but you see, that I think that much detail we can't do here, you see, in the group. We have to, in the group, we have to get the general notion, you know, and you know, this is not really an encounter group, you know, one of those therapeutic groups where they might go into that sort of detail, you understand? There are groups which actually try to work that way. Yes, you have a question.
I would like to know, when you were talking at the beginning, are you saying that with words we bring out memory, and memory is making objective? By using the word, we're objectifying the memory, and we can see...
No, we are bringing, by using the word, not only bringing out the memory, but we're producing the actual state which we are trying to explore, right, such as anger. See, we find the words which will bring up that previous anger that is still simmering. You've forgotten about it perhaps, but it's still there on the reflexes. And it's ready to spring again into action any time when something happens. But instead of waiting for something to happen, because if it happens, it'll happen so fast you may not get a look at it.
You have time to look at it.
You will if you bring it up by words, you'll have time to look at it. But the main thing you'll have, one of the big things you have time to look at is that the words are doing it. Right? If the words were not there, you would miss the main point. Do you see? That means thought is doing it. The words represent thought, right?
So when we're thinking and we're not using words, if we're thinking we're not using words, are we still using words, but we're just missing the fact that we're using them? Or are we thinking in some kind of another language?
There may be another language. You know, there may be an image language. There's an implicit thought, which you see, it goes without saying. If whenever anything like this happens, I've got to react in this way, right? That's the thought. Now, instead it just reacts. That's still, because remember, the thought spreads out into all the other reflexes, so the thought is still going on in another form. For example, if I wrote it out on paper, it would still be the thought, but in another form, right? It can take many, many forms. It could be put on a television set, it could be carried by radio waves, right? It can be carried by all the reflexes. You see, they're all part of that thought. They're different forms of that one thought. Is that clear what I mean? It's very important to see this, that this thought goes out and spreads over the world all over through radio waves, and other people pick it up and they get their reflexes. So it's all thought. Now, the point is that the words are a way of bringing the thought into evidence, right? Whereas often it works implicitly without your being aware of it. See, if you respond to somebody, you have a reflex that food of that kind disgusts you, and you will just get a sense of disgust. But it could have happened by some sort of words, couldn't it, in very early childhood? So, therefore, but that's still thought, even though that expression of disgust is basically thought, because that's what controls it, that's what makes it happen. It's on there on the reflexes. I wonder if you see what I mean?
Yes, I think so.
You see, so thought spreads all over the place in many, many different forms.
We're just not aware of it, you're saying.
Yeah. But we're not aware of it partly because of our culture, which tells us that thought is only intellectual, right? And therefore it's no use looking at this other stuff.
So
We might become aware of it if it weren't for that.
So by doing that, we can really focus and see our real intention, not what we're telling ourselves.
Well, we can see what is really happening, and that is happening is producing a part of our intention, right? You see, if there's a valid, necessary reason to be angry, then, or to do, say, to be impelled to do something, then you will get that intention out of the thought, right? See, if you say it's necessary for me to do my job, right, you find yourself getting the intention to do it. You see, the intention can flow out of the thought, so the intention is still part of the thought.
I'm wondering if you said that you need to put into words, you know, like what you've understood, and then communicate it to the thought process. How does that keep from becoming another system?
It does go in. There is danger that it will happen, but see, we're going to have to discuss later what, you know, how this, you know, may happen. You see, what could be done with this. But we're saying that it is necessary. The thought process will not know what has been seen without some sort of way of translating it into thought, right?
Anyway, isn't one of the ideas to bring out the assumptions that are already in the thoughts?
Yeah.
So it won't harm that much if they go back. They're already.
Well, we're bringing out the assumption, and we may then form a new reflex and make a habit of it, and so on. We could go wrong again, but saying we're going into it so that we're just learning about it now. You see, we're not trying to actually change it. That's the crucial point. If we once think we're trying to change it, then we get into all the tangle of questions. But we're saying whatever happens is grist for the mill. You see, if that happens, you can learn about that.
A lot of times I look at it the other way around, that the thoughts come out of the intentions that we may not be aware of. But it seems a little strange to me to put the emphasis on the thought.
Well, because many of our thoughts intentions are reflexive. They just come out automatically. And they're coming from reflexes, which whose basis is thought. You see, the intention is implicit in the thought. You will be impelled to do something if something is necessary. If somebody says you must do it, you know, it's necessary to do it, it's necessary, or doing this will give you something you really want, right? The thought, then you will get the intention to do it, right? See, we have this picture that there's somebody inside who is given all this information and then decides to have the intention to do it, right? I'm suggesting that is not so, generally speaking.
But I'm thinking of cases where the person, for some reason, has to do something and then will generate thoughts that justify it.
Well, that's the next step. You see, he may have one thought saying, I must do this. He has another thought saying it would be wrong to do it. And he gets a third thought which justifies it anyway, right? You see, the whole thing is one reflex after another. You see, I think we have to see this system just working. And somehow intelligence can come in there and get out of this, but I'm saying that as long as the system works, you don't know what's happening any more than why your leg should jump when you touch that bone.
So basically you're saying that the system is working by itself, reflexively, mechanically, but it gives the impression that there is a me, a sender.
Yeah, the system contains a reflex producing the thought that it is I who am doing it. You see, we'll have to go into that. You see that it has a very elaborate system of covering up what's happening. So this will take some time to go into, you see. You see, and that I think we should go on from there if nobody has any urgent question. Now, you see, we have I wanted to say more about thought. You see, thought is incomplete. It doesn't cover, if the thought of the table doesn't cover all about the table. It picks up a few points about it clearly. It has vast numbers of things like the atomic constitution, all sorts of structure inside, how it's all related to everything. You see, it's a simplification or an abstraction, we say. But one way of looking at it is to say thought provides a representation of what you're thinking about. Like the artist makes a picture which represents somebody, but it isn't somebody at all. It's just, sometimes a few little lines are enough to represent that person, but clearly the person is far more than that, right? He has an immense amount in there which is not in the representation. And so therefore thought does not provide a complete picture or counter information about the thing it's supposed to be about, right? When we take, for example, the thought of the table, it has only a few salient features, and also it's somewhat ambiguous. See, a lot of different, the thought of table includes a lot of possible things that might be tables, even all sorts of strange shapes and sizes, or occasionally something would come along you wouldn't expect to be used as a table. You see, so it's constantly adding different forms and shapes and so on. So the word table it calls up a representation in your mind, probably of an image of some sort of table, your typical table. And then there are all sorts of forms it could take. So you see, this object is this. Immediately, if an object fits is somewhere, either those forms or somewhere between those forms or similar to those forms, or in some vague way even, then it might call up the notion of table, right? Or the word table. And they're all put together. And the thing is then that you have that, you can see that that's a kind of reflex. You see, when you look at this, there's a reflex in your mind. You don't actually utter the word table, but there's a potential reflex. That's a table, right? If somebody were to ask you, you immediately say that's a table. So the information is there in your mind already on tap, isn't it? So therefore, the thing is recognized by the fact that it would fit that representation, right? It would be one of the possible forms of that representation. Is that clear? And any form of that will operate the reflex. Is that clear what I'm driving at? So, and therefore you recognize it. Or when you think about it, you can then think of all the things that are attributed to it and associated to it and so on, and connect up to other reflexes and so on. See, everything you think about is connected to reflexes, which will involve what you can do with it. For example, this table, the representation of the table in your mind is connected to reflexes with what you can do to the table, or you can put things on it and so on, so that you are already automatically ready to put something on there if necessary. Right? You see, so you see how it's all connected up, and that the intellectual reflexes and the visual reflexes and the emotional and the physical and the chemical and everything are all connected up, so that you are ready immediately to take action, unless it turns out that it is not a table and it won't do what you expect, and then you say it's incoherent, and if your mind is working right, you say something is wrong, I've got to change something, right? You see. So that's the way thought works. Is that clear? It gives you vast amounts of connected information, interrelated, connected, logically related information, also with all sorts of ways of it's sort of open. The symbol is not as ambiguous. See, the word table is the symbol, right? Whose meaning is ambiguous, so that it can add all sorts of other things in it. It has a tremendous potential for connecting things up. Is that, see, you could say that the earliest thoughts before there was language would probably involve images. See, if somebody raised that question, that the child, before the child can use words, probably uses vaguely defined images to stand in for the things it's thinking about. For example, animals will see a part of an object and expect the whole, and so will very young children. Therefore, it seems clear that a part of the object can call up the whole, or objects that are similar or vaguely similar could call up the whole class, and so on. So it makes a reflex, so that symbol is makes a new reflex which connects all the other reflexes. Is that clear? Every one of these objects that the symbol can stand in for has in itself a set of reflexes of what you can do with it, right? And that symbol connects that all, right? It's another reflex which connects all those reflexes. So you begin to see thought organizing into a very complex, rich structure. See, when it's working right, it can do all that. I've hardly begun to touch on it because it goes on to thought, to logic, to reason. You can form very abstract symbols. For example, we talked today about the symbol of necessity and contingency, the two words, right? Now they can stand, if you ask what are they, you can't imagine what they are, right? In other words, you have no picture of what is necessity or what is contingency. But you can say, but you have a vast number of things which those will connect up with, right? And any time you want to bring order into what you're seeing, that's one of the things you've got to do, is to sort out what's necessary and what's contingent in this particular situation. Right? Or another set of very abstract things is the general and the particular. The general is the reflex of inclusive, and the particular, narrows it down, right? And you treat you treat things by the general and the particular. You say that, this table is something general, but it particularly is made of wood. It is a certain shape. It's right here, and so on, and so on. You see, so that also is all worked out, and there are a vast number of things, So if you were to try to find out how all this thought process works, you could probably spend a lifetime and still not get there. But I only say this to show that there is a lot to thought that is not the culprit. You see, that thought is not just pure wickedness, but that you have this whole structure which is very subtle and very complex and so on, and which we probably know very little about, and does everything for us, but it has gone, it has this flaw in it, right? This thought is part of a system which includes all our reflexes, our relations to other people, all that we do, all our society and everything. So now this thought then it works by a representation, right? In other words, by a symbol and by a representation, right? You see, a symbol stands in for the thing. A word is a symbol. Is that? You can use images as symbols, simplified images, right? The Chinese ideographic language came from originally pictures, and they were simplified finally and became mere symbols, right? But then the alphabetic symbol is still more powerful because it has need have no resemblance whatsoever to what it represents. It's far more flexible, right? So therefore, that was the power of language. You see, now you have all those symbols, and the symbol produces a representation which might be something which sort of it presents it again, as it were, gives you a sort of a feeling for it, right? For example, you may have seen, if you represent a human face by a circle with two dots and a little triangle for the nose, and then the mouth, if the mouth is curved up, it represents a smiling, happy person. If the mouth is curved down, it represents somebody who's unhappy and frowning, right? So if you look at that, you will get a feeling in there as a smiling, happy person or a frowning person, you see. You see, so that is a kind of representation of the meaning of the thing, you see. So now you have to keep all that in mind. You see that representations can get more and more detailed, become more like artist pictures. They may be diagrams, they may be blueprints, they may be all sorts of things, right? And that's all thought taking different forms, right? See, every one of those things is thought, right?
So this level below the verbal,
yeah,
that's another system of symbols.
Yes.
Pictures, perhaps? Is that
pictures or lines or, very simplified pictures or blobs or even or something hardly, just enough there to stand in, right, for something. And you see, it would seem to me that a child who doesn't yet talk could probably do quite a bit of thinking through that. And, for example, a child has to learn that objects which disappear behind, according to Piaget, the psychologist, the object disappears behind a something and then reappears, he claims that it acts as if it thought that the object had vanished and a new object had appeared. At some stage he learns that it's the same object, but he needs a symbol for that. He doesn't yet talk, right? So he must have a sort of vague picture of a blob. He doesn't have to have the exact picture of the object. That would be a nuisance, right? So to make such an exact picture in his mind. So there's a kind of pre-verbal symbol, and then there may be other, others that we don't know about. And you see, so that language is on top of all this, but then when we start to talk, we forget this, and these symbols now begin to, we don't recognize that they're still part of our thought, and they seem to be something else, right?
So this is what you were speaking about earlier in terms of bringing these things up into the verbal and understanding them?
Yes, well, at least getting a look at them, right? You see.
This is where I'm not quite clear,
Right.
because I'm wondering, as you talk about this, it seems that it's true.
Yeah.
There's this whole underlying level of pictures going on.
And
But does that mean we're... Excuse me?
And feelings as well, you see, little feelings can represent. See, Einstein said that, Einstein didn't talk until quite until he was fairly old. And he said that a lot of his thought consists of feelings he can't describe, which obviously are standing in, right? So you might imagine that the little child has sometimes represent things by feelings. You see.
My question is, this seems to elicit a certain level of clarity when you start to bring these up and verbalize them.
Yes.
They may be missed otherwise. But is it the... Are we to be selective about this? Because it seems to be going on all the time. What I'm wondering is, can we constantly be bringing...
No, we can't. No, I think we're just learning about it. You see, we're not trying to do anything. You see, this is crucial. We're not trying to achieve an objective, we don't have a program or a goal that we could define, right? We are learning, right? You see, I'm trying to say, here's something we didn't know about this process, right? It may be relevant, it may not. It may turn out to be helpful in some context, to the fact that we know it. And then we may be able to observe some of it by bringing it up. You see, bringing it up into words, and you might get a connection to some of the other stuff, and you get a better feeling for how it's working. See, because one of the troubles is that this thought process is going on, and we don't know how it's working at all. And when we don't know how it's working, we very quickly regard it as something else, non-thought.
So we're making a better map, sort of,
Yeah.
of what we're doing.
Yeah. Yes, you see, one of the key difficulties has always been, I said, that thought does something and then says it's not thought, right? And then it tries to, that's a problem, it tries to do something about it while it keeps making the problem. Because it doesn't know what it's doing, right? It's all a bunch of reflexes working. Remember, thought is the past, right? Past participle. It's been registered there, and that registration is through a set of reflexes. Right? So that if this form appears which fits that whole set of representations that would be brought up by the word table, if it fits in there, then you get all the reflexes to the table right away, which makes it very useful. But then you can make a mistake and you made the wrong movement and you're incoherent, then you've got to say, okay, it's wrong, I've got to go over it. I'm discussing how thought would properly work, and does actually work in many areas. In order to show that, first of all, to show that thought is not all bad, but secondly, to understand what has gone wrong, we should have some understanding of how it would work when it's right.
And is this the difference between thinking and thought, as you described earlier, the present in the context of a workable thought versus...
Well, when you're thinking, you're ready to see that when it doesn't work, and you're ready to start changing it, right? Now, thought sort of works automatically. Now, thought is always there, but the thinking it means that when the thing isn't working, something more is coming in, which is ready to look at the situation and change the thought if necessary.
So it's an element that's outside of thought.
It's a bit beyond thought. Let's put it. It's not purely the past, right? It's not purely a set of reflexes in the past.
Would it be thought energized at the moment and the other one passive in the past?
Well, the past is active. That's the trouble. You see, the past. It's not really the past. It's the effect of the past in the present. See, the present has left. left a trace in the past. The other way around, the past has left a trace in the present.
The thinking would be even more energized.
Yeah, the thinking will be more energized because the thinking is more in the present, right? But that present includes what thought, the incoherence that thought is actually doing, right? You know, and it may include allowing new reflexes to form new arrangements, new ideas, you see. If the reflexes are all sort of open and flexible and changeable, then that'll all work nicely.
So if I understand you clearly, by looking at these primal feelings and thoughts, images, we have a second opportunity to look at them again, more energized, with more...
Yeah, we see them right there, and we are able to look at them with something a little beyond, we suppose, beyond the conditioning, right?
Right.
It's not entirely conditioned how we look, right? You see, so therefore we say it's more alive and so on. So, and we say we're saying we're doing this because it's very important to come into real contact with this system, which really rules our lives. I mean, in addition, it's very necessary, and I've explained how all the good things it can do and how it works when it works properly and so on.
Can thought deceive us that it's thinking, but it's not really thinking?
Oh yes, it can deceive us about anything and everything. You see, there's no limit to its power of deception.
Yeah.
Because you could say every trick we know, thought knows in the next moment, you see. If we see a trick, then thought has it there in the next moment in the reflexes, right? So thought is us, you see. So in other words, thought is not different from us, right?
So we are the deceivers, and we are the deception.
Yes. See, so see, thought can do all that deception. Now, but I've discussed how thought works when it is not deceiving, you see. Now then, and we say it gets into this trouble which comes for many reasons. It's hard to analyze it. One reason is that ultimately the chemistry is too rigid. All these connections are too rigid. Or you could say there's the thought of absolute necessity, which provides a hold on the whole thing. But they all work together, right? What?
How is absolute necessity?
Well, you see, there could be a view of absolute necessity, which was just a perception saying, at this moment, it's as far as we...
Falling on my head, I gotta move.
Yeah, you've got to move, you see, and that's it. Now, but then you say it's absolutely necessary for me to do various things to achieve my ambition, and that may be the past, you see. It may be this whole system saying that. Right? Well, that's really, you see, so we have this situation then, right, that we have, that thought provides representations which we can produce outside or inside and communicate, produce as symbols that we can communicate, and also that hold everything together and connect everything.
Kind of a mass media?
The mass media carry them all, you see. They disseminate them. They act like seeds, that's a good word, disseminate, you see. That it scatters them, they all become seeds of further reflexes, right? So the people who receive them, they become new reflexes. They take root and become new reflexes, right? And it's all a system, you see, and working. Now, and you can see that thought is inherently going to be incomplete. You see, it can at best provide a representation, an abstract representation. It will not contain the thing itself, right? The thing itself is not only more than it could be contained in it, but it has, thought is not always right. It has parts in it which are wrong when extended. It's also, the thing itself is always in some way different from what we think it is, right? You see, it is never exactly what we think, and some of our thought is mistaken. You see, when extended, you see, for example, people believed that Newton's laws would hold forever because they held for several hundred years, and yet, you know, a new Einstein quantum theory and relativity came in and overturned them. And you know that during the late 19th century, Lord Kelvin, one of the leading theoretical physicists, said it's no use to young people to go into theoretical physics. It's finished. matter of the next refinements in the next decimal points. And you see, the thing didn't work out that way. And now many people are talking, some physicists, of a theory of everything. They don't have it, but they say we're going to have it, we hope, and we expect. And but you see, it's the same. Thought is always trying to claim that it knows everything, right? It has some tendency in it. We have to see why. You see, this is a very dangerous tendency which leads to self-deception, right? It doesn't leave open that the unknown. You see, it doesn't leave open that thought is only a representation, and you must leave room in your thought for something more and something different. See, healthy thought requires that it intrinsically be built so that it has room always for something more and something different. Saying whatever the representation is, it could be something more and something different. Or to put it differently, you could say that at most you could say, as far as I know, that is the way it is. But that leaves room for something more and something different. Now, that would be healthy thought, proper thought, or orderly thought would have to have that form and structure. And now, a great deal of our thought doesn't have that, right? You see, for example, religious thought often doesn't have it. A lot of our political thought doesn't have it. You know, even a lot of our scientific thought, as I've just explained, doesn't have it. And so on, you see. So, therefore, that's a crucial point, that one of the ways thought goes wrong is it claims implicitly, at least, to be able to know everything, right? Or that it could get rid of uncertainty and get rid of the unknown, that it really, there's always this drive to say we will eventually get hold of it all, right, in thought. That has been, I don't know always, but there has been. And that seems, as civilization develops, that drive seems to even get stronger. It gives a sense of security, doesn't it? You see, considering that thought is reflex, a lot of thought is aimed at increasing our security, right? And in a very illegitimate way, it provides for greater security. I mean, we get food, you know, we store up food and do various things. So it begins then to gradually extend and say, I not only need that kind of security, I need other kinds. I need emotional security, I need relational security, I need to know it and be sure of everything. You see, and once it has security, it provides for the endorphins to coat the pain nerves and you feel well. And as soon as that's questioned, the endorphins are removed, the nerves get all excited, and there's a drive to think the thoughts that will give you security, saying that I know it all, right? You see, so that's part of the reflex system, right? You see, so therefore, can we stay with the fact that thought does not know at all, right? That thought, there's always uncertainty, or at least as far as we can see, there's always uncertainty. There's always the unknown, right? That our representations are adequate up to a point. For example, we could say this table, you know, if you take a circular table, it looks like an ellipse from various directions, but we know that those are all different appearances of a single circular form. So we represent the table as a circle. We say that's what it is, a solid circle. But then a scientist came along and said, well, that's mostly empty space. It's atoms moving around inside. And it's really quite different. It's only very roughly a circle. It's rather like a cloud might look like a circle, but it's no circle, you see. So so we could say the essence is now the atoms, and we say the appearance is now, the circle is, according to these scientists, only an appearance. But then they came along later and said these atoms, originally the word atom meant it couldn't be cut, and yet they said now it's made of electrons and protons and neutrons, and and mostly empty space, and therefore the atom is only an appearance, and these other particles are the essence. And then came quarks, and then came other things. You see, so you could wonder if they're ever going to finish this, or whether it's not just that it's always a representation, which may be adequate or not. It may be a correct representation up to a point, right? If it's correct, it will guide us coherently, to the extent that it is correct. At some stage, since it's incomplete representation, it must cease to guide us coherently, and then we need to change our thought. So we do not expect to find some eternal truth about about the nature of matter. Right? The nature of matter, as far as we could see, could be infinite, unlimited, right? Qualitatively as well as quantitatively. In other words, there's no valid reason why we should think of matter as limited. You see, people have been thinking in the 19th century it was limited in this way, and then now is the 21st or the 22nd, they may think entirely differently, and they'll look for a new final theory, but which looks very different, and then it might go on and on. But you see, we don't. It's important that there is no such. There's no justification for that. That it's not the right way to think. You see, to think that way is going to mix up the thought process.
So,
What?
what you're saying,
What?
just to clarify, is that knowing can never be absolute.
Yeah. I've focused on matter, where we have the most solid knowledge, right, with science, and that cannot be absolute. But then if we go into society and into the psyche and so on, it seems that's far less definite than the scientific knowledge of matter, right? So therefore, we're saying knowledge is limited, right? Knowledge may be adequate. Knowledge provides a representation. It is not the thing itself, whatever that may be. It is not that which is, right?
We could just call it a view. There are many different views.
Yeah, it's an appearance or a view, but it's not. It's also a representation in the sense you can bring it up again and again. It's a reflex which gives rise to a view, right?
Right.
We have to keep it open. And not put it in a conclusion that close it.
Yes, well, that's right. You see that, but then you have to admit that that we're not going to get the whole of it. That there's always the unknown is always open there. You see that, and it must be that the unknown is, far beyond the known, right? Immensely beyond the known. See, for example. In physics, they now. Well, we'll discuss that later. I think you see it probably would come more appropriately later. Knowledge is limited. That's the point, and the proper application of this system of knowledge requires that knowledge know that it is limited.
You describing two ways of thinking, one that limits and solidifies and maybe practical a certain way, and another way that is always open?
Well, the way that's open is the most practical, you see, because the way that's open includes relative solidification to any degree that may work, right? We say, this table is relatively solid, I admit it, you see, but I don't say it's absolutely solid. You see, you could find an atomic structure in there. It's mostly empty space. If you light a fire, it turns into gas, you see. So the explanation is the atoms just simply are sort of held together by forces, and when the temperature goes up, they sort of just come apart, right? They go into space, you see. So therefore, you'd have to say that this table is not absolutely solid, right? The idea that the table is solid is a representation. And I gave the example that it looks solid, you expect it to be solid, your reflexes are set for it to be solid. If this were a very good laser image, you would be ready to put a glass on it and it would go through, right? You see, so, and then you would say that, that's the wrong representation, huh?
So what is it that allows us to see our conclusions in different areas of life where we're no longer learning, where we've come to an opinion?
Yeah, well, opinions may be all right, they're assumptions. We may make assumptions, right, as long as we know they're assumptions.
But what allows us to see those opinions and those conclusions that we have?
Yeah, well, I think the question is the other way around. Why don't we see them? You see, why do we think that they are truths?
Well, if we tried to program it to learn about every aspect of ourselves, that too, it seems, would be just part of the system.
You can't really program it, but I'm saying that there may be an unconditioned capacity or potential in us to look at this, right, and see what it is. That's what I'm suggesting. We leave that open. Right? Now, I think it's essential for a healthy thought to leave that open, because if you don't, then you imply that it's all conditioned, and therefore there's no way out.
We can never know, because we only think we know, because of the constant change. There are no absolutes.
We never know absolutely. We always can know relatively, right? It's a fairly good notion that this is a table that will support. I know that, right? But I can't say the ultimate absolute about it, you know, what it will be like after this changes in time and so on. You see, that's relative knowledge, right? Relative to certain conditions and circumstances. But the notion that we know the whole thing, or that we have absolute knowledge, you know, will not work. Also, as you're saying, things change and the knowledge is limited to the past. And we extend our knowledge from the past toward the future. We project it, right? And very often that works. So we can take it, we take it saying as a provisional assumption that it's going to work. What we know is going to work, but we have to, the key thing is it's open. If it doesn't work, then we're ready to see it isn't working and change it.
So we can't
Now,
own what this is.
I don't know if this is to the point at this part, but when I look at that table, there's a certain knowing of it as a table. But together with that, there's a feeling of it as a table.
Yeah, you can feel it. You expect it to be solid and so on.
No, but within me, together with the representation,
Yeah.
comes a feeling of realness.
Yeah, reality. Huh?
Right? And that feeling, it seems to me, is what makes that solid. In other words, and maybe we're going to do this later, but it's that feeling aspect of the table that locks the door.
Yeah, but you see, the reflex of the representation is a set of reflexes all tied together, right? And it includes the feeling and the visual appearance and all that, right? So the word table ties all that together, right? It stands in for all of that. You see, so now you get a sense that this is going to be solid, you see, which may be mistaken, it may be right. Now, see, you get the fact that the mind starts to attribute various qualities to the table according to, you know, partly the way things have gone in the past and partly by what is observed now. So, for example, we've gone into this many times. If you have a television set and you see a telephone and there's a ringing noise, then your mind attributes it to